this Black Sheep Squadron that I was a member of really wanted to get action.
The object of the whole thing was to shoot down airplanes.
When you went on the offense in our squadron, every man was a shooter.
If you weren't aggressive, you didn't fly with Papy Boyington.
These are the true adventures of Major Gregory Boyington's legendary Black Sheep Squadron, as told by the men who lived them.
I got one kill over Rabaul.
I homed in on a zero and began to get hits on it.
The one that I closed in on blew up, and I could still smell the debris that I flew through.
January 3rd, 1944, 19,000 feet above the Pacific island of Rabaul, the sky is on fire as 5 of the Black Sheep battle for their lives. Bruce Matheson is in the thick of it.
I had just gotten up to the point where I was in the 1st Division. I have no idea how many people were behind at that point when we were attacked by a fairly sizable number of Zeros. Well, more than 10 or 12, I can recall that, and it just broke up into just a big gaggle. All of the aerial combat was very, very confusing. We were over Japanese territory, over open ocean, where you knew, or you were pretty sure, that if you went down there or had to parachute there, that would be the end of you.
Leading the Black Sheep, Major Gregory Pappy Boyington, with 24 kills on his record.
We were very, very fortunate to have him as our squadron commander. He had an extremely combative nature. He was a fighter long before he flew airplanes.
January 3rd, 1944 is a pivotal day in the life of the Black Sheep Squadron, a group that's only existed since the previous September, when pilots from disparate units are assembled in the Solomon Islands. Job number 1, protect the B-24 bombers.
The aggressive jumps north of Guadalcanal up the Solomon chain were just beginning to take place.
The war was far from won, and we thought that our contribution, which was to try to render Rabaul neutral or useless, was what our task was. And to me, my particular job was to fly formation, protect other people's tail, and if I was lucky, get a shot at somebody and maybe shoot one down.
The Marine Corps doesn't plan for the cobbled-together 214 to become legendary.
We had no ground echelon, we had no ground officers, we just had ourselves, just 24 people, a flight surgeon and an intelligence officer, and that was it.
Major Gregory Boyington, a former Flying Tiger who fought the Japanese in China, is assigned to lead the 214.
I always considered him, and to this day, the best thing that could have happened to that group of pilots, because he was one of the few people that I've ever seen in my 30 years in the Marine Corps who was a born leader and could inspire people, not only through talking to them and motivating them, but through his flying ability and his aeronautical skills. Boyington, of course, had flown a full combat tour with the Flying Tigers, where he was one of the few people in the area at the time who'd ever seen a Japanese aircraft, let alone shoot any down. So his words, his leadership, his directions, his teaching stem from experience. And I think it's the same thing as any other venture. You tend to learn more from somebody who's been there and done that than you do from somebody who reads it from a book or just tries to translate it for you without experience.
Well, the experience factor is enormous in air-to-air combat. The training that you had does not come anywhere close to simulating the fury of an air battle. A pilot who has gotten a couple of kills has developed thirst for it. He's able to ignore the distractions, and he's probably developed some techniques that are rote with him. And the inexperienced pilot is dazzled by all this, and he's watching things that are not really germane to getting a kill or defending himself. And the pilot who has gotten a couple of kills is worth several inexperienced pilots, in my opinion.
It soon became apparent to us, too, that he was not popular with the other senior officers. And this tended to make us gel around him more because he turned more to us than he did to his peers. Instead of being aloof, instead of being a major like all the other majors that I had come across, he was very, very fraternal. And he led by example, and he called people by their first names, and it wasn't Lieutenant this, it wasn't Captain this, it was first names. We didn't call him by his first name, we called him Major or Skipper.
I always called him Greg. Everybody else called him Pappy.
And incidentally, we didn't call him Gramps. The Gramps didn't come until, Lord only knows, long after the war.
I'll tell you what Boyington used to do that just impressed the hell out of me. The duty officer always assigned a brand new airplane to Boyington whenever he was flying. And Boyington invariably would take that number off the board and put it down with one of the new boys and give it his new airplane to the new boys, because he said, I'll fly those old clunkers, I'll fly circles around them anyway. And that's exactly what he did. And I was in 2 squadrons after that, and there wasn't one CO that ever did that. That's what made him stand out in my mind. When you have a CO like that, there isn't anything he won't do for him.
And then everybody's enthused. And so they said, hey, we ought to have a name. Why don't we call ourselves Boyington's Bastards? No, the papers will not put that in the papers back home. You got to think about something else.
In the autumn of 1943, Marine Combat Unit VMF 214 becomes the Black Sheep Squadron.
Bob Bob Black Sheep, as you know, is the Yale song, and we had people in the squadron from the Ivy League. And almost all the pilots in the squadron had come either as college graduates or from college, most of them from fraternities. And I wouldn't be surprised but what the Bob Bob Black Sheep and the chorus might well have prompted someone to say, why don't we become the Black Sheep? Because the song says we are poor little sheep, little lambs who have lost our way, which is the way we sort of felt.
Boyington appreciated the power that the Corsair had. It was an R2800 engine, and it had about twice the horsepower of the Zero.
The Corsair was just exactly the airplane we needed. We could outrun them and outdive them.
And it could simply run circles around them, but it couldn't turn with them.
The Zero, that bugger could turn. And that you just didn't get involved in a dogfight where you're trying to outturn him because there's no way you could do it. You'd always try and keep speed and dive away if he was on your tail.
Just to hit and get out, and that was our tactic throughout. We could never turn with him, no way. Anyone who tried would get shot down. In fact, we had some P-38 pilots come over. They were going to go help us escort the B-24s over Rabaul.
Because once in a while we'd have other squadrons come in and fly with us.
And we had told them, don't try to turn with these guys, you'll never make it. And I think there were something like 13 planes in that flight, and none of them came back. They were all shot down. That's not too well known, but they didn't hear a word we told them.
But if you could get a burst of fire into that airplane, it was going to go down.
It didn't take many hits to ignite the Zero. We were using incendiaries, and they were the big killer. And the Zero just came apart real fast if you got incendiaries and all these mini fuel cells that they had in it over the wide area of wing and fuselage and so forth. I got one kill over Rabaul where I was high cover, 5,000 feet or so above the B-24s, which would put me about 27,000, 28,000. And these Zeros were sneaking in trying to throw phosphorus bombs at the bombers, the B-24s. And I think 2 came through and threw their bombs, and the third one saw the fighters ahead and turned away. And it was sufficiently high, and he turned away from his area of aerial superiority back over his bases. He turned to the southwest. And I chased him down because he wasn't smart enough to go back into a safe area. And I caught him.
Well, John Bolt he's just an American hero. He's the only fighter pilot that I know of that was an ace with both piston airplane or propeller airplanes and jets.
Outwardly, he's very, very calm and genteel, but he's really a fanatic when it comes to doing the things that he wants to do and the things that he thinks need to be done. One of the things that he did while a squadron pilot, which changed our opinion of him from that point forward, happened on a day when we were escorting Air Force or Air Corps bombers up to Bougainville, and the weather was very, very bad. And the upshot of it was that the bombers got confused and they took off in all different directions. And of course, we had no idea where we were because they did the navigation for us, so we had no idea which one to follow to get home. Boyington was leading the flight, so we joined up in pretty much a parade formation and stayed with him, and he took us down through the clouds, and we got down quite low. And we wound up right in the harbor at Bougainville between Boulallie and the mainland, and zoomed right straight across the airdrome and across a number of naval craft in the channel and headed on south back to where our home was and made it back there without incident. Unknown to any of us until after it had taken place, Bolt decided that he'd have to go back there and have another look. So he got his airplane refueled and without telling anybody, took off and went back up the same place we'd been and strafed up there for, I guess, quite a while and sunk or damaged a number of naval craft. And when he came back, of course, Boyington was fit to be tied, but we thought that Bolt from that point on was Mr. Intrepid, and that's just the sort of thing that he would do. He won the Navy Cross for that. Admiral Halsey was in the area at the time, and he found out about it, and of course he was just Admiral Halsey's type of guy. And Halsey sent him a congratulatory telegram, which I've read copies of, but it was quite laudatory. And Bolt never alludes to it. As a matter of fact, he probably wouldn't even talk about it unless you asked him.
Bolt was taking on being very aggressive. You know, he was trying to follow in Boyington's footsteps, I believe.
Boyington was probably more apt to go back for a second effort than the less aggressive pilots.
Another aggressive pilot, Chris McGee, who's flown for both the Royal Canadian Air Force and the U.S. Marines.
So he'd had quite a bit of fight time, more than the rest of us. McGee was a very, very fearsome and fierce competitor.
He would carry a submachine gun with him, hand grenades. He was wild, and he was always doing something silly, I thought, like flying over Japanese barges and throwing out hand grenades and strafing and doing things. But he was a damn good fighter pilot. I liked him.
But men like Second Lieutenant J. Ned Corman learned that aerial aggression comes at a cost.
I had been doing just exactly what I wanted to do. I'd fly in the airplane I wanted to fly, and I was a fighter pilot. And I was on a mission we helped cover the landing on Bougainville, and we hadn't seen any enemy aircraft. And we were coming down on the western side of the island, and here is this, well, it turned out to be a coastwise freighter, and they had camouflage nets over it. So I didn't say anything to the other guys in my squad. I just peeled off and went down and strafed this thing. Well, the minute I opened fire, the whole shoreline opened up, and I got tracers coming at me. I had black AA purse. So the rest of the guys went home. They thought I was shot because I went right down on the trees and went back to the mountains and pulled up and then finally came back home to Bella La Bella. And everybody thought I'd been shot down, and nobody came back to look for me. And I was a little bit upset about that. But that's the only thing I can remember about being totally green and getting my nose plastered where I should have been shot down. I really should have. And that was just sheer stupidity.
But a few weeks later, on Christmas Day, 1943, Corman gets a confirmed kill.
I was flying wing on Bernie Tucker, the tail end Charlie in formation. Bernie kept coming on around. I looked over my shoulder and I saw the Zero coming right up my butt. So, needless to say, I just dove out and I tried to follow this zero, or he pulled up in what really had amounted to an Immelman. He pulled up and rolled out, but I could not turn with him. I couldn't get inside of him. So I pulled up and rolled out, and when I rolled out from that maneuver, I was in the middle of the Japanese Air Force. There must have been 12 or 14 zeros. I was right in the middle of them. Well, I didn't waste any time. I just nosed over, dove out. So I dove until my ears hurt so badly, and I got a tail flutter, which the Corsair had. When you reached the speed of sound, you got a real flutter out of that airplane. So anyway, I pulled out and I looked around. There wasn't anybody around me. I lost all the action. So they always told us to preset your compass on the heading for home. So I rolled out on the heading for home, because you never knew where you were going to end up. So it was roughly a heading back to Bougainville. And I'm heading back in that direction. I see these 5 specks out ahead of me, and I think, well, their guy is going back home. So I went into, and I had altitude advantage on them. I think they were probably about 12,000. I was probably about 15. I came in behind them, and the closer I got, the more I realized that, man, those aren't friendlies. Those are zeros. And they were in a group of 5 with a 3-plane section and a 2-plane section. So being greedy, I picked a 3-plane section and opened fire way out of range, much too far. But they saw my tracers go by and they just peeled off. But the one I closed in closer, I think the one that I closed in on, I had hit because he didn't take any evasive action. In fact, he started smoking and then he blew up and I almost flew into him. I could still smell the oil and the debris that I flew through. So anyway, he just rolled over and headed down to the water, and I rolled right with him and flew formation on right down to the water, and that was my airplane. So anyway, our airplanes were blues, so I headed back for Bougainville, and on the way home, I didn't see anybody else. I landed at Bougainville, refueled, went back to Vella Vella, and Bernie Tucker didn't come back for about 2 hours. And I was beside myself. I realized I'd gone away and left everybody up there, and I felt horrible. Well, Bernie finally came in and landed, and he had gotten 2 airplanes that day himself. So we got a little action that day. But I have always felt that was probably the greatest Christmas present I've had. But as I got older and probably a little wiser, I got to think, what a hell of a way to spend Christmas.
The Corsairs are as tough as the men who fly them, as Bruce Matheson learns.
This particular day, I homed in on a zero and began to get hits on it. And I got so carried away with what I was doing that I didn't pay any attention to my 6 o'clock, which is behind. And I suddenly heard this sound that sounded like hail on a tin roof. And it took me what I thought was a matter of a minute or so to figure out what this was. Probably I took a split second before I knew what it was. And it suddenly dawned on me that I was being hit from behind. And they had taught us that if we ever were hit, that the Japanese Zero could not dive and turn with us. So immediately when I heard these things rattle all around me, I did a split S and turned and dove straight down and began a corkscrew going straight down. And the Japanese plane stuck with me for long enough to put 3 or 4 big 20-millimeter cannon holes in the airplane. I can remember seeing, as I looked out the side, I can remember seeing big pieces of the airplane, my airplane, flying off. And I thought, well, I hope this doesn't continue. And then my thought was, is the airplane hit badly enough so that I'm not going to be able to drive it home? It wasn't, and I was able to ride it. And although I was by myself, it flew home a long way by myself. It flew well, but when we got it back, I had been hit. There were over 100 bullet holes, small caliber bullet holes, and 2 or 3 big cannon holes in the airplane. And it had to be junked. I presume they took the engine and a few things out of it. But I won't forget that, because that's I felt in the back of my mind that that's as close as I ever came to being not necessarily lost, but being shot down or having to bail out. And it was obviously not at a good place because it was near Balali, which was more than 100 miles away from our closest base.
The Navy had a very poor lack of regard for the necessity of being able to see behind you. And they sacrificed that to armor plating. And immediately behind the Corsair was a solid wall of armor plate, which was very nice when the 7.7 millimeter machine gun bullets of the Japanese are banging off the rear of this armor plate. They would stop it. And the Japanese Zero's 20 millimeter was a very low velocity, and it wouldn't shoot through it. And it exploded on contact anyway, so it would explode around the tail or up and down the fuselage. But the armor plate saved lots of lives, but at the same time it created problems in that the Zero could get behind you without you being able to see him. You could only see behind your wingman.
Boyington's got a plan to keep the Zeros in sight and away from the B-24s the Black Sheep are assigned to protect.
Pappy wanted you to fly loose so that you had to be wide enough. So if you had to turn into each other, you could. So we never flew a parade formation anywhere in combat. We always flew pretty flat, and we did what they call the Thach weave, which is something that a Navy pilot had created to enable you to get all your guns from both airplanes. You had 650s on the Corsair, and so you had 12 of those, fully ready to open up on anyone who intercepted that weave. That's why it was so effective.
Boyington had had a year to think about it. He'd been out of China for almost a year, so that tactically he was miles ahead of the Marine Corps brass. We lost very few bombers. I can't recall ever seeing a dive bomber shot down. A couple of the 4-engine bombers I've seen shot down, but the bombers, we took them in and out safely.
But Boyington doesn't want to just keep the Zeros away. He wants to blow them out of the sky, or wreck them before they take off.
His theory was that we could do more good by destroying the Japanese fighters either on the ground or in the air with our own fighter forces than by using the dive bombers, as he used to call it, as bait.
Boyington really, I think, inaugurated this tactic. We call it the fighter sweep. And simply would get 4, or probably more likely 8 planes, leave the bombers 30 or 40 miles out and increase the speed, approach the target fast, catch the Zeros taking off. And that's where we got our kills, going through the Zeros as they're climbing out. And the general rule was that if you didn't get them just climbing straight away from you, you simply ducked under them and tore on past them. If you didn't sneak up behind and assassinate this guy who didn't even know you were there, you didn't get him.
As my estimation, we were against their top-notch pilots. I had a lot of respect for them.
They were not foolhardy or reckless, but they had a lot of aeronautical ability, they had a lot of guts. And I have seen them split S, which is come right down through a whole formation and layers and layers and layers of fighters weaving back and forth to try to get a shot at the bombers down underneath, which, if you think about it, is pretty foolhardy and a mid-air collision waiting to happen. But I never saw one of them have a collision. They were first-rate pilots.
The early Japanese pilots that were typical of the ones found in the Solomons had probably thousands of flight hours. That is, the United States was rearming from almost nothing, from almost zero. But the Japanese had been a heavily armed, militaristic nation, had been fighting in China for a decade, and their pilots were highly experienced. but they were irreplaceable.
Over 2 6-week tours of duty, Boyington's Black Sheep rack up 97 confirmed kills, along with a large number of probables. The squadron loses 11 members. But Boyington himself seems to have a charmed life. Pappy swears that even going down in a hail of machine gun fire won't be the end of him.
It was, "Don't worry about me, boys. I'll meet you tomorrow in San Diego." And we believed him. He had made that statement many times. That was part of his mantra.
But Pappy's invincibility is put to the ultimate test on the 3rd of January, 1944. Boyington's Corsairs are set upon by a dozen Zeros from the Japanese air base at Tobera.
And I can recall seeing Boyington shoot down an airplane. And then we found out later that he actually shot down 2. And I looked and found a target and broke off and went with it. When I came back, or left what I was about, he was gone and his wingman was gone. I didn't learn until much, much later, after I'd flown back home, that he didn't come back.
Oh, we just couldn't believe it, because it was entirely beyond our ken. We just had never anticipated this happening, because he was just a god to us. The next day, we organized a search mission for him, and we flew into Rabaul Harbor on the water looking for him. I don't know what we would have done if we'd found him, but we were flying under, because Rabaul is an extinct volcano, and the anti-air aircraft was all up on the ridges, and they couldn't depress those guns enough to get us, or they'd shoot their own men on the ground. So we were flying under a lattice work of tracers and went all the way around that harbor, looked in every airfield, but it was more or less just to let them know that we really missed the guy that we needed most.
Since we were almost to the end of our tour anyway, and since we had lost our squadron commander, they decided that they would take us out. They had another squadron to come up and replace us.
It's the end of Pappy Boyington and his Black Sheep Squadron. Temporarily.
Nobody ever really gave up. They said, if there's one guy that can make it, this old dude probably can, and by God he did. Boyington was in the prison camp, I think, at Ofuna, which was outside of Tokyo.
And it was pretty pathetic, the way they were treated. And of course, during the war, everybody assumed he was shot down and killed. And so when he got released, of course, he was given the Medal of Honor posthumously. Well, when he came back, of course, they gave it to him as he was alive.
So somebody on the West Coast, and I don't really know who it was, decided that they would get all of us together from several Marine Corps air stations and go up there as a welcoming group, which we did. And I would venture there probably were, I'd say, 12 or 15 of us. And we didn't reunion in a bar in San Diego, but we came close to it. We reunited in a bar in San Francisco.
And, we went to the hotel. It was a 3-day wild-ass drunken party. Finally, Sunday afternoon, we had to go back and go to work.
13 years after the war, Boyington writes his autobiography, which in 1976 is loosely adapted into an NBC TV series starring Robert Conrad as a much better-looking Pappy. The show's a success with the public, but not with the Black Sheep themselves.
The thing about the Black Sheep television program that we found so terribly distasteful was when the lead-in came on the screen, and before we ever saw any people or any airplanes, we saw this legend which rolled by and said, this is a group of misfits who were fugitives from court-martials and couldn't get along and so forth. In other words, before the thing even started, it portrayed all of us as just a bunch of bums. Then the program itself was bad enough because everything on the ground was very unlifelike. They had women, which we didn't have. They had clubs, they had animals and pets and Lord knows what all. So we felt that as long as the show focused in on the air, that the aviation scenes were good. They were fairly lifelike. They had gun camera film, they had lifelike shots of Corsairs, but everything on the ground was 100% bull. When we had our first squadron reunion in 1976, it was when the television program was running. It was then regular routine series, and Boyington attended. And I can remember we had all of the Black Sheep and their wives and friends to our home for a cocktail party. We asked him why in the world he would allow this to go on. And as a technical advisor, he certainly could have seen that this could have been straightened out. And he sort of shrugged it off and said, well, the whole program is aimed at a 12 or 13-year-old boy, so you've just got to get down to their level. But we were never, ever satisfied about the way that thing scrolled in the front, particularly by that time, people like Bolt, who had gone on to become lawyers and professionals and were being criticized by their peers as being shown as this bunch of misfits and court-martialed SKPs, which we weren't at all.
And Pappy explained to us, everybody was on him hard about, because he was a technical advisor for that show. And he says, well, one thing you guys have to understand is it's not a historical documentary. And it sure as hell wasn't. I think that was an excellent description of that show.
Like it or not, the TV show has, through endless reruns, helped keep alive the memory of those 84 days in the Solomon Islands. Since those days, the 214 has seen combat from Korea to the Middle East, part of the legacy of the original Black Sheep, the men who flew with Pappy Boyington.
No question about it. He was in charge and he knew exactly what he was going to do. It gave you a great feeling of confidence, self-confidence, and that self-confidence is infectious. And that flowed right down through everybody that he talked to, including other squadrons, because I can recall friends years later saying how fortunate they were to have flown on fighter sweeps and things when Boyington was in the lead.
He was very much a professional fighter pilot and always with the good of his squadron at heart. And, there wasn't a man in that squadron that wouldn't lay down his life for Pappy Boyington. And that's all I can say about it. I've never ran into a comparable pilot. And when you see how a man operates in combat, you're pretty much bonded with him.